that we are right now starting in this new year. And our resilience is something that is really on our heart at Pipeliner, deeply rooted in the understanding about you can only really be having resilience. John, something is...
Go ahead, Nicholas. We can hear you okay?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Can you...
Yeah, we're live. Everything's good.
Okay, cool. So again, I hear myself. How is that?
Everybody's muted, so yeah, just could you go ahead?
I have a technical problem.
Well, Nicholas has a brief technical problem. Again, just so for those who may have missed the intro, this is the Work and Life 4.0 series. We are talking today about resilience. We've got 6 experts from across the globe, all with different perspectives. And we're going to talk about how to navigate change and how resilience can help you navigate change. And we're going to get straight into it today. And we're going to ask the first of our guests, which is Kim Ades. So Kim, in your book, you talk about bounce back ability. And we've been through such a dramatic period that bouncing back, it really seems like it's not just something that's nice to have. It's a critical skill, not just to recover from the pandemic, but to deal with the rapid pace of change going forward. So talk to me a little bit about bounce back ability.
So what is bounce back ability? It's another term for resilience, but what does it mean? It's the ability to recover fairly quickly from an adversity. But based on my years of research and working with extraordinary leaders, it's a little more than that. It's not just the ability to bounce back. It's also the ability to leverage the adversity. So when something bad happens, when you experience a negative event or an encounter, and you experience a pain of some kind, it's giving yourself the opportunity or the moment to fall and being okay with falling. So it's not like being, what do you call it? Teflon Don, where everything just rolls off of you. It's really about experiencing the blow and then getting up and then asking yourself, what do I do with this experience? How do I turn it into an advantage? How do I leverage it? How do I take it, put it under my belt, and use it to my benefit and the benefit of others? And that's what we really talk about when we talk about bounce back ability. Those people who are soaring make something good out of their negative experience. And so that's not easy to do, because what's required in order to create an advantage out of a negative experience is the ability to interpret that experience in a positive way. So something bad happened, our minds don't go there. Our minds give us all the reasons why this was a terrible, horrible, awful experience. And what I try to teach my clients when I coach them is, okay, so you've had the blow, you've experienced the pain, you've had a moment to grieve, mourn, whatever you need to do. Now, what are we going to do next? Where are we going to take this? And how do we rewrite this experience so that it's of benefit to you and anyone else that you are in touch with? So that's the real important piece. And that takes muscle. It takes muscle to see a negative experience in a positive light.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. Listen, we're going to invite Meredith in next. Meredith Alexander, and Nicholas, if you'd like to, if you're good now, if you'd like to ask maybe Meredith her first question.
Okay, so Meredith, great to connect, and my question to you is, as we know, what we have heard right now, mindset is so critical to succeed and overcome really the challenges in life and that we all face, right? Not only in COVID, yeah, but I think COVID was definitely giving our many challenges, not only to individual, to family, to children are at home. So what is in some advice that you have on how people can build their own resilient mindset? How is that coming?
Well, sure. And I want to give kind of a continuation of what Kim said, because Kim is just so right on. And for those of you who are watching and don't know a little bit about my story, I kind of had a dress rehearsal for the chaos of COVID, you might say, when literally 5 years ago, this past Friday, my youngest daughter was crushed by a boulder while traveling to South America. So I got that call that a lot of us absolutely dread. And to Kim's point, I either could become the second victim of this boulder, being told that my daughter would not survive, or figure out how to do something different with that. So to emphasize what Kim says is mindset is not something like an aspirin that you take when you have a headache. The resilience is not an easy button. Resilience is a muscle that you do develop, and it is thanks to these boulder hits throughout your life and then figuring out what you're going to do with them. So the very first thing to build resilience is, to a certain extent, what Kim said, the grief, whatever, breathe, take a breath.
Can I ask you in that area, because as a mother, or I think how you could control your emotions?
Well, initially I couldn't. Initially, it was really a storm of every negative emotion that you can possibly imagine. But the beautiful thing in this is that I had to get on a plane to go to, because this happened in Colombia. I was in Florida. Wow. And so I had to get on a plane. And fortunately, I'd had decades of training in what I like to call the inner game. And as I looked around at how I could get my power back, because by far the worst negative emotion was the feeling that I had no power. And I had to get that power back. And I knew it wouldn't come from those measurable outer game skills like branding and marketing and all my entrepreneurial, hacks. The truth, the answer came from within. And first, it meant taking a breath. It meant regrouping. And it meant saying, what can I control? That's it. Starting out with, what can I control? And how can I ask better questions? And what was I going to make this mean, not only in the context of my life, but in the context of my daughter's life? Was I going to turn this event? Now, my daughter had lived 22 years as an powerful influencer in the best sort of way, teaching English all over the world. She'd been to 7 to 9 continents. I could go on and on about all the lives that she had already impacted. So was I going to reduce that to her death, me living the rest of my life as a mother of a child who'd been killed by a boulder? Or, to Kim's point, what was the opportunity here to carry on her torch, even if her physical body didn't survive? So I had to choose, was I going to cast myself in the role of the grieving mother permanently going forward and lose all of these things that I had from her for 22 years? Or would, to Kim's point, was I going to look for the gem and say, okay, what am I focusing on? Am I focusing on the presence of what I want? In other words, my daughter making a huge impact in the world and having her life mean something. She'd lived 22 happy, glorious years, so I couldn't regret that she hadn't had a wonderful life, even albeit potentially at this point, from what they were telling me, a shorter one, but she'd been happy. And so was I going to look at the presence of, surely she's going to die because she has such severe injuries? Or was I going to look at the presence of something bigger? And where was my focus going to be? So therefore, where was my energy going to be? I'm sure many of you who are listening have heard Tony Robbins say, where your focus goes, your energy flows. So the only way I could get my power back was to not only have my energy flowing in a direction that might go the direction that I would like, but also to help everyone around me, because now I was hit with a barrage of people saying, how's Skylar? Is she going to die? Is she going to make it? So what I did was go back into my inner game training and simply try to find one thought that felt a little bit better, one question that my mind could understand. And it's those little tiny questions of that your mind can believe. In my case, it was, has I ever been around anyone who'd done something impossible, achieved that? And the answer was yes. So it's, what are you focusing on? What are you making it mean? What can you control? And take a breath and then take action.
That's great.
Thank you.
Great feedback. Just remind everybody, the Twitter chat's going on, #WorkAndLife. That's work, WORKANDLIFE. So join in that, join in the comments on the stream on YouTube as well. We love seeing your input. All right, Russell. So Russel Thackery, you talk a lot about burnout and stress, and sometimes people don't realize how this actually manifests itself in work and life. So what are some of the ways of identifying burnout and stress, and how do you know if they're becoming an issue for you?
John, great question. Well, the two things are different, but sort of linked. If you imagine a Venn diagram with stress and burnout, and then the bit in the middle is where all the issues start. So stress effectively is a physiological, completely natural response to given events, for the need for the body to have energy in a way. It produces a bunch of neurotransmitters, chemicals, hormones. It affects your nervous system, your paranervous system, and gets you going. So stress by its very nature is actually okay. The problem with stress is how much we have of it in our bodies, and we have too much cortisol over too long a period of time. We do ourselves damage, both in terms of hypertension, diabetes type 2, and not being able to sleep, and actually just starting the process of burnout. And burnout is a physical thing, which is about being continually tired, but not just tired, being stretched. I remember in The Hobbit, they talk about the ring riders in The Hobbit, the sort of the 9 riders of Mordor who ride around, and their spirits over the course of centuries get stretched and stretched and stretched until they become invisible. And in a way, that's what happens when you have burnout. You become increasingly stretched, you become increasingly tired. And the thing to watch out for, along with the lack of sleep, this feeling of being stretched, is you lose your passion. You lose that sense of meaning that you have in your life. You lose that sense of meaning you have for work. Coming to work becomes really effortful. I mean, the idea, in fact, a lot of us are actually experiencing this now when we're all locked down, certainly in the UK where we are at the moment. What's happening is we've been in endless lockdowns and people are tired. They've got nothing really to talk about because you can't go anywhere. We're tired. We've got endless cortisol running. We're not getting enough exercise. We're not having enough joie de vivre. We're not hugging and touching and such like. And we notice people becoming overwhelmed. We're working much harder than we've ever worked before. In a funny sort of way, I was chatting to a youngster, actually, someone who's about 19, 20, a salesperson. And what they were telling me was that actually, I'm single. I'm working from home at the moment. Come the end of the day at 5:30, all this hard stuff is lovely. But actually, I've got nothing to do. I've got no one to talk to. I've got no one to go and see. So guess what I do? I just keep working. And so they work until 9, 10 o'clock at night, and then they wake up in the middle of the night because, of course, they haven't had enough exercise. And then a vicious cycle starts. You can have virtuous cycles, but this is a vicious one. And so burnout's that sense where you become overwhelmed with work, partly because you want to, because you've got nothing else to do it. You start to sleep less. You lose that sense of joy and excitement and passion and that bounce you have in the morning, that va-va-voom you get when you think, wow, I've got something else to do. Just thinking, how do I drag my sorry backside out of bed again? I was going to say, how do you get back in the car and make a drive for 300 miles? I've just done that, actually, and I've forgotten the full joy of actually driving. I mean, I'm late because I've been stuck in a traffic jam. Imagine that, a traffic jam. And now I've got something to say, and I'm sparked up again because we're moving, we're doing something different. So The thing to watch with people is this idea of losing sleep and this noticeable lack of passion, this noticeable lack of interest, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
listen, great. Thanks, Russell. And
Well,
Nicholas.
that leads me directly. It's very good because our Kim, that is perfect. Or what Russell was telling us, because I can ask you really this question about now that the people, not only in COVID, I think it's beyond COVID. It's hundreds of years, not even maybe thousands of years, are the same, that people in some form are maybe are a hard word, coward, and often very lazy. Yeah. So the question, and this is not coming from me. Yeah. I'm not saying that. Immanuel Kant said that 250 years ago. Yeah. He was writing that in his book, and he said humankind is not living to their potential. So it is so convenient to be immature. So the question is right now, how in a company, and even in these stressful times we're all in, how we can become not playing safe, be bold, and having a different approach, that the company is really right now seeing that as an opportunity and not going on the safe side. So Kim, I'm interested what you have to say to that.
I have so much to say about that. I want to start off by saying there's not one human being in the world who wants to be thought of as lazy. There's not one human being who doesn't want to succeed. And so have you heard of Simon Sinek's concept of you need to start with your why? Have you heard of that? Well, I don't believe in that. And I'll tell you why, because your why, my why, Meredith's why, Dave's why, all of our whys are the same. We all want what we want because we think it's going to drive our pleasure, our satisfaction, our sense of good feeling, right? We all have the same essential why. The more important question is, what's your why not? What's stopping you? What's getting in the way? And so when I work with people, what I want to know is what's getting in the way of you really living your life, of getting up in the morning with that va-va-voom. What is getting in the way? And what I will say to you is that what's typically getting in the way of our ability to step into our strength, our power, our abilities, is that we have a set of beliefs that fundamentally hold us back. And most of the time, those beliefs are something we're not even aware of. So
Yes,
there are all these thoughts, all these concepts floating around in our brain unconsciously, and they're pinning us to the ground, and they're not permitting us to step up and do what we're capable of doing. And so this is the really crucial question, is what is getting in your way? Let's find it, let's highlight it, and let's move it over. Let's clear the runway so that you can take off. And sure, your why is nice to know, but it's not the critical piece.
But Kim, I would agree with that approach 100%. But as a leader in the company and running it and managing right now worldwide with different teams around, I cannot influence the people because it's a personal decision. This is a very personal position that people have to take responsibility for their why not.
Yes, but here it is. If you're unaware of your why not, it's hard to take responsibility, isn't it?
Yes.
So now, as the leader of the company, what can you do to make a difference? There are many things you can do. Number one is you can lead by example. But number two, and I will tell you, I've done a ton of research on this one very subject, is that leaders who learn fundamental coaching skills and bring them into their companies experience a complete turnaround in their staff. Higher degree of engagement, higher loyalty, lower sick days, more productivity, more creativity. And so your job is actually to engage with your people and find out what their why not is. It's not about you taking responsibility for it. It's about you creating an environment where that's okay to explore. The other piece of it is, I will tell you, one of the beliefs that a lot of employees have that prevent them from stepping up is, if I make a mistake, I will get in trouble. I'll look bad. I'll be viewed upon in a poor light. And so as a leader, one of the things you can do is say, I welcome mistakes. I encourage you to make mistakes. I invite you to try to step forward. And when I look at leadership, what is leadership? Is stepping forward into a place of unknown. That's what every leader does. And that's not what we encourage people to do on our teams, right? We completely encourage them to do something different, to play it safe. And it's what we do as leaders because we're afraid too. And so the tone you set, the environment you create is really what needs to happen from a leadership standpoint. Sorry, I'm a little passionate about this.
No, it's great.
Yeah, we love passion on these things, on these events. Thanks, Kim. Listen, Meredith, so it was very interesting what you talked about last time and all the process that you went through. And obviously people face different types of challenges, you know, in their lives of different magnitude, etc. So for the general people who are listening here, how can you really build a resilient mindset? What are some of the steps that you can go through?
Well, I think again, Kim and I are just so simpatico on this topic here. I mean, it really it begins with making the commitment, and I use that word deliberately, commitment to get out of the default mode of blind spot thinking. To Kim's point, every single client, I don't care whether they're C-suite or whether they're entering the job market, who comes to me is engaged in what I call blind spot thinking, which means that you believe you're focusing on one thing when you're actually focusing on exactly the opposite. So case in point, to really reduce it, if I were to say to you, John, where do you want to be a year from now? And let's say most people might go, well, let's see, a year from now, I want to be making, let's say I want to be making 7 figures. I want to be healthy. I want my team to be. And so what I'm focusing on, I believe I'm focusing on where I want to be a year from now, right? Where I want my company to be. Where in reality, what I'm focusing on is the lack of the presence of where I want to be. So all of my focus, i.e., all of my energy, all of my creation is completely focused exactly the opposite place that I intend it to be. So what does the opposite look like? The opposite would be, where do you want to be a year from now? A year from now, I know, I am committed that our company is going to be rocking. Our teams are going to be creatively engaged. Our teams are going to be envisioning things that maybe I can't even see right now, right? I am there. I am tasting, I am touching, and to Kim's point, coming at it a bit more emotionally charged here, anyone and everyone on your team, for the most part, is going to be able to identify the what's wrong with this picture. That's what we're trained to do. That's our primitive mind. Those are the games we're taught when we're a child. Anyone can do it. A great leader makes the commitment to no more default thinking, to take responsibility, become aware of your inner narrative, and to become the sovereign of that inner narrative by little tiny thoughts that are very authentic, very believable, that your mind can buy into. I'm not talking about standing in front of a mirror and going, I'm $1 million company, when you're just starting off. I'm talking about finding that one thought, you know, such and such, when they started, they were in no better place. What did they have? They had perseverance. We have perseverance. It's the story of Corning, the CEOs going to their team saying, there is no better team to face this crisis right now than all of you. Because to Kim's point, when you have that ability to envision something, to feed that energy, it becomes contagious. Then and only then can your team members feel that tacit permission to start envisioning on their own, to start getting creative, to start daring to potentially, quote unquote, fail, but fail forward. So when you're facing a crisis or trying to build your resilience, it begins with making that commitment to start being aware. I use the acronym ACT. A, become aware of your inner narrative and what you are making it mean. Is it empowering you, or is it making you feel a crunch? And then C would be committing to change. And again, This is not trying to look on the bright side, because as you mentioned before, that if you're trying to look on the bright side, where is your focus? It's on the big looming dark side. You're just trying not to look at it. So it's authentically finding the thoughts that your mind can little by little say, yeah, I believe that. And going back to my own case, on the plane, it started with, has anything impossible ever been achieved? Yes, I was flying on something. And the next thought was, well, have miracles ever happened? Well, again, my mind had to acquiesce and say, well, yes. Well, does my daughter deserve it? Has she lived a life that's worthy of that? Yes. So little by little, I could inch from a place of total despair to a little bit of hope, a little bit of belief, ultimately from that knowing that as a leader who happened to be her mom, I could go in there, and even with the doctors, we're looking at tangible reality that she can never survive this. And I can say, look, I know my daughter will be fine, whatever that new fine will be. We just have to get her there. And that's how you inspire your team, is when you start believing it, you create a momentum that is almost irresistible. And it all starts in that inner game.
So at the end of the day, it always comes back what you believe.
Yes, but to believe that you have no influence over
Sure.
what you believe, I think it's a trip up for a lot of people. A lot of us believe that because I've always believed that, and because the people around me believe that, it must be so, it must be truth. And I would challenge people to look at the beliefs and track them back. They probably developed when you were 7 years old. A lot of research and studies show that. So
no, I 100% agree with you. I just wanted to move a little bit away from people also to companies, because you see, a company is sometimes, huge companies cannot on the individual belief build their existence. Their belief is in their services, in their product. Where is the inner force coming from, of the company? Like in Pipeliner, we really believe we have the best product. We fight against the biggest companies in the world. Our competitors is the biggest companies in the world. And we are believing we have the best. Where is that coming? Is that a wishful thinking, or is it rooted in some evidence? Is it rooted in something that people can? And this is all. Every belief has to be rooted in some form of a deep knowing that I'm not dreaming something. It's not like a dream. I can rely on that. I can build on that. This is a foundation.
Well, I'm going to play with you a little bit with that. I would say that, I mean, there is so much evidence. I barely know where to begin. Literally, let's just play with the Wright brothers for a moment. They had a concept. There was no evidence that it was possible. They were literally crashing and burning. And yet they were saying this is possible. Same thing with Kennedy, with his speech. We can make it to the moon in this decade. And the people who knew, who had access to the evidence, said, you're crazy, that's impossible. In my case, doctors came back later to tell me, because they were always pulling me into the nurses' station, what you are seeing here, tangible evidence, is textbook medically impossible, going all the way back to Hippocrates 2,000 years ago. If you can see someone's brain, then they do not make it. So what I believe neuroscience is challenging now is how things are created. It's not an after fact of the existing evidence. It takes those individuals who believe, to your point, they believe the evidence is simply that it's possible. That's enough. For me, when I got into that state, and that's how it's an energy. If you've been around someone who is very charismatic and they believe something so powerfully, and that's why there's evidence of different companies who have very charismatic leaders who really believe that something is possible, and they're able to permeate the doubt of the individuals. But again, our companies are a collection of individuals.
It's true.
And so the more you become a role model as a leader, How deeply do you believe that this is possible? Is what you believe the level of service based on what you're already delivering, or what you believe yet is possible to come? So you have to find that. The key is finding that before you have that tangible evidence. Every single company around us, I've got my water here, I mean, this company started out in someone's kitchen. There was no tangible evidence that it would end up massively in Publix. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely. Thank you. That was good clarification. And Nicholas, I think you got a question for Russel.
Well, Russel, what do you build are the emotionally intelligent and the mental toughness needed to succeed in a sales situation today? How do you build that? Or how is that coming? Russel?
Well, the same way you build everything. It's through thoughts. I disagree quite a lot with what I've been listening to, but that's good because that's always quite interesting. I mean, beliefs are just thoughts we have a lot. They're not necessarily unconscious. They're just things that we tend to believe. They're just thoughts. Then they're easily changed. How do we build resilience? How do we build, as you're saying, the sort of thing we're talking about? It's about accountability. It's about leaders creating accountability for people to maximize their potential. And what happens is leaders are poor at accountability. They're poor at accountability of themselves. And emotional intelligence is about being true with yourself and true to other people. And getting away from this idea that we treat everybody like children. So we're terrified about hurting feelings, and we have robust adult conversations with people. We understand their potential, we understand their performance, and we measure the gap between those two things, and we help people get from one place to the other. It really is a very simple equation. Emotional intelligence is just a collection of ideas and thoughts, as is resilience, and mental toughness is just, in a sense, emotional intelligence plus resilience. That's all it really is. What you're really saying, though, is with people, they're able to grip their own thoughts. They're able to actually change their narrative. We are just a series of chemistry and processes that turn into a bunch of stories we tell ourselves. And I don't worry about whys and why nots and such like. I think basically what you're looking for, you get because of confirmation bias. And if you think you're going to be successful and you've got the skills, you've got every chance of doing it. But if you're lazy, you won't. And the key way of getting rid of laziness, as you said earlier, Nicholas, because you believe in Kant's thing. I disagree with Kant's thing, because actually what you really meant was the neurochemistry of actually saving calories and not being lazy by that sense. But the secret to all sales performance and company performance is just accountability.
Yes, that is definitely that you can recommend that you can go there and you can speak to the people, but you cannot make for people decisions that they have to make for their own.
Well, it depends what the decision is. I mean, some salespeople might want to actually do very little and have a lovely time and miss their targets and sell the thing that you don't have rather than the thing that you do have. So, for example, you often find this in product businesses where you've got a pile of square-shaped inventory in your warehouse, and the salesperson would rather sell the round one. But sometimes in organizations, it's about actually the tough conversations that leaders have with their teams. And we shouldn't be frightened to have those, because actually that is about maximizing potential. It is about being clear with people. And like Meredith said, it's about being a role model and showing what you're prepared to value in terms of performance and what you want to change.
But Russell, I 100% agree on that. But let's go back to sales, because this is really a topic. We have more sales books than ever. We have more teachings than ever. We have more coaches than ever. We have our unbelievable knowledge that's out there. But still, the facts are that almost 60% of all salespeople are never performing according to their quotas. They're always there's always underperformers. So
yeah, well, that's a failure of sales books, sales coaches mindset, and an abrogation of leadership management. I mean, this is the problem. We forget that leaders and managers, their job is to lead and manage. They have a right to lead and manage. And abrogating that responsibility is the problem here. And and as the pendulum swings away from management and into leadership, we can indulge ourselves in writing lots more books and having lots more vagueness and what it is we're trying to achieve every single day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I'd like to invite in now Tracey Grove. So, Tracey, in your book, you say that while obviously we can't necessarily change our environment, sometimes there are factors outside our control, but we do have the power to shift our response to the environment by building in the resilience that we've been talking about. So, explain what you mean by this.
Sure. So when we think about what we think and do, everything that we think and do really is a conscious choice. We've talked about beliefs and thoughts and them being either, subconscious or conscious. To me, they really are a conscious choice.
Tracey, we can't see you.
Yes, she's having camera difficulties.
Yes, okay. Apologies about that.
Okay, sorry.
You get to look at my picture. It's very boring.
No, because sorry.
When we think about the world that we're in right now, it feels increasingly out of control. We've got a lot of challenges that we're facing today, and that's not necessarily something that we can change. But where we have no control over a situation, we do have control over what we think, feel, and what we do about that situation. I'll tell you a little story. In 1965, psychologist Martin Seligman did some research, and today you would never do this research. It would seem, be deemed to be immoral, but just a good caveat here, there was no dogs were harmed in this research. But he took a bunch of dogs and he basically did some classical conditioning with them. So in the Pavlovian tradition, he would ring a bell and then he would give a light, very harmless, but slightly painful shock to a dog. After a few of these shocks, the dog would start reacting to the shock before it happened. We all know this Pavlov's dog sort of situation. What's interesting about this is that the dog would react as though he had been shocked when he heard the bell, regardless of whether he had actually been shocked. So Seligman then took it another step further. So he put several dogs into these large crates. They were divided by a low fence down the middle. So the dogs could see the other side and they could easily jump over to the other side. One side of the crate was electrified and the other wasn't. So when Seligman put the dogs on the electrified side of the fence and administered this very light shock, he thought, of course, what naturally would happen is the dogs would jump to the other side of the crate, the safe side. But they didn't. They just lay down, didn't try to escape the shocks, and they had been taught that there was nothing that they could do to avoid being shocked. So they gave up. They just didn't bother to even try. So he coined this as learned helplessness. The past had taught them they were helpless, and despite the real evidence to the contrary, that they could get away from the shocks, they accepted this as reality. So he then repeated the second part of his experiment with dogs that hadn't been through the classical conditioning in part one of his experiment. The dogs hadn't been exposed to shocks or the bell ringing. And in fact, as soon as he put them in the crate and electrified the crate, they all jumped over the fence immediately to escape the shocks. So you might be asking, what the heck does this have to do with people? We learn to be helpless too. Research has shown that the way we view negative events that happen to us have an impact on whether or not we feel helpless. We've talked about these beliefs a lot, but when we come to believe that we have no control over what happens to us, we can think, feel, and act helpless. Now, no one's born this way. It's not an innate trait. We've talked about the fact that, it's resilience is something that's a muscle that you can build. This is a learned behavior, learned help. And it's conditioned through experiences over which maybe we don't have control over, but maybe we do have some control and more than we think we do. So even when presented an option to avoid the pain, we don't take it. But we can overcome this way of thinking by building resilience. We replace those old beliefs about our lack of capacity and our lack of ability to deal with a problem with new beliefs around our capacity and our capability. And by doing so, we learn to have compassion for ourselves as we go through those difficult situations. I often talk with my clients about them being called growing pains for a reason. We learn and we grow through pain. And we learn who we are in that process. I love that Kim talked about building the muscle at the beginning. It's something I share with my clients all the time. We can all build this muscle. You're not born with it or born without it. It is a muscle we can build by shifting our mindset, to one that sees opportunity rather than threat. When I think about resilience, it comes from our belief in our own efficacy and our ability to deal with change and the use of a repertoire of problem-solving skills. So that to me is what I mean when I say we may not be able to control our environment, but we can control our response to our environment.
Yes, thanks, Tracey. And Nicholas, I think you have the next question for Dave Sanderson.
Yes, I'm super excited about that. First of all, nice to meet you. And I'm super excited to ask you really what you made the decision to stay on the plane, when it ditched the Hudson River that we were all there's the movie out there, and not a lot of people probably know that you were the last passenger before the captain left the plane. But what was the decision that helped you first not thinking on yourself, and why you did that? What was the reason?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a question I get asked very often, because what was interesting about that situation, my game plan was not to stay on the plane. My game plan was get to the aisle, get up and get out. That's what I kept telling myself as the plane was going straight to the river. But when I got to my point, when I got to the aisle, something happened and changed my mindset. And it was my mother. My mother passed away in 1997, but there was something she would tell me when I was a child that popped into my head at that moment. And it was, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And I knew that I was okay, but I didn't know if anybody else in the back of the plane was okay. So that's why I climbed towards the back of the plane to see if anybody needed help, got behind everybody and started making my way out. And candidly, Nicholas, it was my turn to go out. I went out 10F and I was like, okay, time to go. And all of a sudden I looked out and there was no room on the wing for me or no room on the boat. And that's why I was inside the plane waist deep in 36-degree Fahrenheit water for about 7 minutes, because I heard my mother say, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you.
Wow. So it's a deep rooted in the belief what your mother was laying in yourself, or it's something that you were connecting in that moment, and that led you to make this decision.
Yeah, I think that's what my third book's about. Is what I really realized when I wrote my third book was it was about my mentor, who was teaching me starting in 1984 all these success lessons that he was teaching me. But what I realized after writing the book, my mother and father actually taught me the same lessons when I was a child, but I never listened to them. Sometimes we don't listen to our parents, and they're probably the wisest people out there. So I agree. I think that's a very accurate thing. It's very timely we ask this question right now, Nicholas, because what happened this last week in Denver, and unfortunately the plane had a situation, United Airlines, and had to return. And when something like that happens, I usually get a phone call to do interviews, and they want the mindset of a passenger that's going through a turmoil or trial situation. And so that's what happened. And that's because one of the most often asked question I still get in interviews is, how did you get back on a plane after what you went through? Still get it. And what's interesting about that is many people from that day still haven't got back on a plane. They still haven't been able to even face getting back on a plane. So this whole last year, what I sort of look at this last year is like a giant plane crash, because, with COVID and social justice questions and the election in the United States, it just keeps going on and on. There's so many people are so buried and dug in, they don't know what to do. It's like a plane crash. No one caused it. It happens, but you got to respond to it. How do you respond?
No, absolutely. And I strongly believe that we are even seeing right now light at the tunnel in the COVID with all the vaccine that's coming, but there is so many people traumatized. And I think that will be definitely a lot of our people need help for the future to overcome that, because we have really bad situation in many areas.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just finish up my little thank you for letting me sort of share this, because a few years ago I was asked to do an interview with AARP magazine in the United States. It was about something that I had never heard about, and I'm sure people here have, but it's called PTGS. It stands for post-traumatic growth syndrome, and it's the opposite of PTSD. And two universities did a study on me on how did I grow from a plane crash while others didn't. And I started sharing strategies. That's how I did my TED talk. And Kim was on as they're sort of chuckling a little bit because my TED talk is about bouncing back. I did that up in Ontario in Canada, and about PTGS, post-traumatic growth syndrome.
Okay.
Wow. Fantastic. And I agree with you about the wisdom of parents. I tell my son all the time that I'm the wisest person he'll ever meet.
He'll never realize.
Yeah, he doesn't realize it yet, but I keep telling him. So
I'm competing with my wife, by the way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, good save there, Nicholas. Nicholas, I think you have another question for Tracey.
Tracey, you also talked about being courageous in turbulent times, challenging assumption and choosing optimism. Given that we are in a period of unprecedented uncertainty, maybe forever, who knows? Yeah. How does someone stay optimistic in all of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I love this question, and I love that Dave talked about PTGS. I think that's absolutely brilliant, because I always talk about the growing pains and growing through fear and moving through fear. We tell ourselves stories all the time. It's just the way our brains are wired. If you think about, the amygdala that lies deep in our brain, this tiny little almond-shaped bunch of nuclei, it's constantly scanning for threat. And as Dave said, it's constant. It feels like there's just threat in the air all the time. It's everywhere. It's in so many different.
It's increasing. It's definitely increasing in our time.
Definitely. So, but the interesting thing is that the threat that we're dealing with today is largely psychological. I mean, obviously there is the COVID thing, but generally it's a psychological threat that we're responding to, like we did in the days when the saber-tooth was chasing us around and we were actually going to get eaten by something. But those turbulent times don't really go away. So we have to think about how we address our response to them. And really, we do have more control than we think we do. But we have to recognize this. We talked earlier about playing the victim. It's easier to be the victim because then you don't have to take any accountability. Dave took accountability for, I'm going to go do the right thing and God will take care of the rest. I think that was a really powerful thing to think, because he took accountability for doing what he felt was right at that time. Playing the victim takes away that accountability. We all love to admire the problem. It's how we roll. It's the way that our brains are wired. But we have to learn to shift to a solution orientation so we can keep moving forward. It's interesting. Randy Pausch was a Carnegie Mellon professor. I don't know if you've heard of him. The last lecture, really interesting. He had terminal cancer, and so he gave a really powerful last lecture at Carnegie Mellon that has become sort of world famous. He talks about this eaten by wolves factor. And so when we're facing our fears and we're dealing with something that's really traumatic and very fear-inducing, in order to move forward in spite of it takes a lot of courage. And that means we have to first recognize and then challenge those stories in our heads in order to validate whether what we're thinking is actually true. Are we really going to be eaten by wolves? What's the worst that can happen? Mm-hmm. Often asking someone we can trust to help us think through the story that's in our head often shows us that our assumptions is completely wrong. Because really, if you think about it, experience is what we get when we don't get what we wanted. I use an immunity to change framework with my clients, which is really powerful to help them to work through these issues. And so I think of it in terms of certain things. First, you think about what is your attention? What are you focusing on? What is the problem? What is the fear-inducing thing? Then recognizing your emotions. What emotion comes up for you when you think about the situation? Is it negatively impact your ability to respond to it? Are you just being shut down by your amygdala? Acknowledging that emotion. Again, it's not about looking through the world through rose-colored glasses. It's about acknowledging the fact that this feels pretty crappy, right? Then challenging that thought, that assumption in your head that you're making about the impact of the event. What concerns could be driving your assumptions? Can you validate those assumptions? What beliefs are making it difficult for you to embrace that fear and move through it? Are you defending an old habit? Then looking at motivation, can you reframe the situation into an opportunity for growth? Is there something you might gain? We focus so much on what we might lose. We don't focus on what we might gain from the situation. And what is the risk of actually not moving through, not taking action? What is the risk for you, Dave, for staying on the plane longer, not moving when you did? What is within the bounds of your control? What resources do we have to deal with the situation? Actually thinking about these resources and what actions you can take to create a sense of progress. Mm-hmm. It's a powerful framework because it helps my clients to think about leveraging the resources, the skills, the capabilities they have to deal with whatever it is that they're dealing with. And it shows them that they actually do have that capability. So it shifts the belief from one of victimhood and learned helplessness to one of optimistic realism, I like to call it.
Yeah.
When we move
optimistic
through change
realism.
Well, when we move through our fear, and of course it's not easy to do this, so it does take courage to move through fear and move on in spite of it. And maybe we fail, maybe we fall. But really when we fall, that's when we learn to fly. And that's when we grow.
No, absolutely. Dyson, thank you so much. That was very, very insightful. And Dave, our last question of the session today, and I think this is a great one, kind of to bookmark everything here. Is you talk about creating a lifetime of purpose, and so explain the concept of a lifetime of purpose and how that can help people succeed in work and life.
Well, thank you for that question. And Tracey, I just want to say something about what Tracey, I truly agree with what she said, because one of the things that people do is it's easy to blame events, but if you keep blaming events, you can't grow. Mm-hmm. You got to get past blaming events. And there's two ways to do that. You got to change your life conditions or change your worldview or change both of them. And so Tracey, I think you're spot on with that. So John, to answer your question, I'll end up with sharing a story that happened to me where I'm sitting even as we speak, because I think it answers that question. And this happened about 4.5, 5 years ago. My wife received a phone call, and it was from a neighbor that needed some help getting her TV on. Now, these are two elderly ladies in their late 70s, early 80s. And, where I grew up in the United States, you always helped your neighbors, especially elderly people. Something how I grew up. So she called and said, can you help her? So I went down. I'm pretty good at turning TVs on. But I got the TV on pretty quick, and they asked if I would stay for milk and cookies. Now, I love milk and cookies. I don't know about anybody else. I love milk and cookies, especially from two older ladies who could probably bake. So as they were getting things ready, I was sitting in their parlor, and they had these books. And they had a lot of books about World War II. Now, I love World War II history. So I was reading these books. When they came out, I said, where did you get these books? And they both looked at me and rolled up their sleeves and showed me the numbers and letters down their arm.
Oh my goodness. Holocaust
and
survivor.
I got stunned. I'm like, she said, we were there. They survived Buchenwald. We were there. I said, let me record this story. They were elderly. I want to get it on tape. I said, they won't let me record it, but they told me for a couple hours the story, how they survived a concentration camp and the mindset that they had to have. And one of the things their mother told them before their mother passed away in a concentration camp was never separate, always stay together. That's your strength, is being a part of a team. So to answer your question, John, I think part of this whole thing is they found a purpose. And that's when I actually wrote my book, Moments Matter. That was how it came together, because I found my purpose. I knew my purpose, but my purpose was then realized through an opportunity to be able to serve at a higher level and really teach people how to grow from traumatic life events. So hopefully that gives you a long answer to a short question.
Oh, that's fantastic, Dave. And what an interesting experience, and what a fantastic. I mean, those two ladies, what they had been through, and yet obviously had come out the other end, and that's such a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things that I do is when people come to me with these challenges, and I get these calls frequently, especially in this last year. Is I use something that my mentor taught me. And I think everybody here probably uses. It's called the virtual roundtable. I've got a virtual roundtable where when somebody has a challenge, I'll say, I'll pick up the phone and call somebody who's had a bigger challenge and say, let's talk to them. You think you're having a bad day? Let's talk to somebody in Ethiopia who's just looking to get some food for the day. And I think putting things in proper perspective for people, as Tracey was mentioning earlier, put things in perspective for people. They'll understand, yes, they're having challenges, but there's somebody else we're having a worse challenge. And if they can survive it, I can survive it. And I think that's one of the strategies I've used. And I think it's a strong and powerful strategy to help people get through what we're all going through right now.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think perspective is something, unfortunately, that is in short demand right now. People have lost perspective. So I think the more perspective people have, the smarter and more sensible their reactions will be. Listen, this has been fantastic. I would like to ask Nicholas to some ending comments here on this great event today, and such fascinating insights and such very diverse range of opinions too, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably you have figured it out that I'm not a native speaker. I'm originally from Austria, Vienna. So they've where really a lot of concentration camps in our country have been, and my grandfather was sitting in one of them. So anyhow, it's a long story. But are coming to America and building a company from scratch, zero, really from nothing to where we are now, needs a lot of resilience. And I want just to give a short tip how I, with constantly problems and roller coasters on a weekly basis in our company, and you have to have resilience, how I overcome that. Besides the mental stuff that I have to do, where I agree, is I go swimming. And when I'm swimming and I'm focusing on the line in swimming, I focus on what I believe, where the inner force of my company is coming from. And I know we have created with great people a great product. And that gives me pride and self-respect. And this self-respect I can hand over to my team and to my other people. They are working around the world, and give them the energy about doing that. But I have to go into my body. I have to do something and to get out these negative emotions and these problems. And when I'm swimming, I'm reminding myself, what is my focus on the line? You cannot talk when you swim. You have only one line, otherwise you think, yeah? And so I'm swimming and I always focus on the line and say, what I really believe, why I came here. And then I realized I came here with the vision that salespeople are the most important force in the world. Why? Because they create wealth and they produce peace. Because if I punch you in the face, you would not buy anything from me. At the end, it's the peace and the wealth, what we need in our society, that it has to be rebuilt. And we hope after COVID that sales is growing, and it needs to grow worldwide, or to get back to not normal, it will be a new normal. And so I go swimming, maybe you go running, maybe you go praying, maybe you do other things. Every person has to find his own path. For me, it's really swimming an hour like crazy, and then I get out of the pool and I feel more energized.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas, for that, and thanks everybody today. Thanks to Kim and Russell, Meredith, Dave, and Tracey. As I said, this is such fantastic insights. This will be available immediately on YouTube, so please do share the link out. Also, we'll have it so the chapters are there and everything, so it'll be great. So thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to doing another of the Work and Life 4.0 series. My name is John Golden on behalf of Pipeliner CRM and Sales Pop. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you for another one of these great events very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.